Well, a survey of some 7,940 different students at 48 different colleges conducted by Johns Hopkins University asked these college students what they considered to be very important to them right now. 16% of them said making a lot of money. But very surprisingly, 75% of them said that their goal was to find meaning and purpose in life. I think that's a big goal of a lot of people in life today, that people are searching for some kind of meaning and some kind of purpose. In his book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, secular psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote, "About a third of my cases are suffering from no clinical definable neurosis, but from the senselessness and emptiness in their life. This can be described as the general neurosis of our time." In Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life, it was on the #1 list for well over a year because it spoke to this need so very understandably. It was so wide read because it zoned in on why we're here and what we can be derived from life itself. Well, with everything that's going on, there's more people today on medication because of depression and because of the feeling of anxieties in their life than ever has been before. The absence of meaning and purpose is causing so much distress on our whole society. Tonight, I want to bring us to the point of asking what life is all about. Well, I recently read this note that a young college student wrote just before he committed suicide. In this note, he said, "To anyone in the world who cares who I am, why I am living, life has become stupid and purposeless. Nothing makes sense to me anymore. The question I had when I came to college are still unanswered, and now I am convinced that there aren't any answers. There can only be pain and guilt and despair here in this world. My fear of death and the unknown is far less terrifying to me than the prospect of unbearable frustration, futility, and hopelessness of continued existence." That is so sad, but that is the feeling of a lot of people. Younger and younger people begin to feel this futility in life. It's a sad, sad thing indeed. King Solomon writes about this and gives us a lot of insight on the subject. In the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Ecclesiastes is like no other book in the Bible. Matter of fact, some wonder why it's even in the Bible, but there's a purpose there, the reason God had to include it in the Bible. But it starts out very negative and down on life. If you just read the introduction going into Ecclesiastes, when you got through reading, you'll probably feel a lot worse about life than you did before you started reading it. It's the only book in the Bible that has such a negative downswing when you first started reading it. Basically, Solomon wrote 3 books during his life. In the very early part of his life, he wrote the book of romance, the Song of Solomon. Talked about his love for his wives, but especially one wife in particular that he dearly loved, and about their relationship with each other. A great romance, if you'd like to read about romance. Then about the middle part of his life, he wrote the book of rules. Of course, that's the book of wisdom, the book of Proverbs. And then in his older age, won't say old age, but older age, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. At this point, he's looking back at what he regretted about his life and what he wanted to accomplish, but he never got it all accomplished. Now, Solomon, at the end of his life, he's looking back over his life. He's making all these observations. He's writing it down, I believe, to help other people, help us as we come along behind him. But during the time of Solomon's reign, he had a 40-year reign over Israel. During that 40 years, they were never at war. It was always at peace, which was very unusual for the nation of Israel. During that 40 years, they rose to an extremely prosperous nation. They were very wealthy as a nation. Solomon became what is considered the most wealthy man who ever lived on the face of the earth. If you took what he had and what was within his possessions that we know about, and if you calculated in the value of money over a period of time and the cost of living, all that kind of stuff, he would still stand as the wealthiest man who ever lived on the face of the earth. This man is one that was considered to be one of the smartest, actually the wisest man on earth. We know the story of how God asked him what he could do for it. He told him to tell him what he wanted, and God would do it for him. And Solomon, in his wisdom, he asked for wisdom to rule the people. And Solomon started his life as king as a very, very wise man. God honored that request. God did what he said he would do and gave him his request. In chapter 1, verse 16, it said, I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had a great experience of wisdom and knowledge. So Solomon's looking back over his life at all the things that he was able to accomplish, all the things that he had, and how while he was the king over Israel, it was the greatest time of peace, prosperity, and all that the nation had ever seen. Unlike many of his books, he starts this giving us the conclusion of what he's going to talk about during the book. You know, most books you have to read through and get all the way down to the end. I used to have a friend that would start reading a book by reading the last chapter first and then go back to the first. He wanted to see what's going to happen before he starts reading through the book. I asked him one day, well, why are you doing that? He said, I want to see if it's worth reading or not before I spend the time going through the book. Well, Solomon cures that. He puts the end kind of right at the very beginning. And he said, I've looked back over all my life and all the things that I have been able to accomplish inside of life. Then back up in verse 2, he says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Now, that's a most discouraging, depressing way to start a book. The word vanity used here is used some 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's not when people look in the mirror at themselves and think how handsome I am and become very vain over it. The word vanity here means an emptiness, a futility. It means that there's no meaning to be found inside of it. So what Solomon is saying here, he said, man, you look at life and you look at what there is there, you'll realize that how vain life really is. Now that's very depressing, isn't it? Very depressing way to start or to think about. The Hebrews had a way of writing, and when they doubled the word, when they said a word twice, it really put emphasis on that word. I mean, it just wasn't saying it. It was really saying it in a big degree. And so he's really serious when he's talking about the vanity of vanities and then repeated them 3 more times after that. He's very serious about the emptiness that he finds inside of life. Understanding what Solomon is saying, this book does not contradict other books in the Bible, which some would say it is. That negativeness, that depression you find right here. What Solomon is saying, he says it under the sun. He uses the term under the sun 29 times. What he means by under the sun is that this is what happens when you live not looking to God. God was above the stars in the sky and everything, in what he was trying to express. When you look just what's around you, it is depressing. It is vain. It is empty. 4 things I think he teaches us in this passage of Scripture. The first is the course of life is futile. Verse 4 says, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. It's almost like Solomon's reading the record of births. Get up in the morning, get the newspaper. Well, so-and-so was born today, and so-and-so was born today, and then turn over to the obituary, and so-and-so died today, and so-and-so died today. And he talks about the cycle and how it just keeps going over and over. People are born, people are die. Days go by and days go by. People are born and people die. That same course continues day after day. I read a quote from a book by Rabbi Harold Kushner. He's a famous Jewish writer. He writes a lot about Jewish history. And he tells a story about one day when a man came to see him for counseling. And he says, after we talked for a few minutes about, common things, he gets into why he came to see the rabbi. He told him the story. He said, 2 weeks ago, for the first time in my life, I went to a funeral for a man my own age. I didn't know him real well, but we had worked together and we'd talked to each other from time to time, and we had kids about the same age. He said, Rabbi, my friend died suddenly over the weekend, and a bunch of us who worked with him decided to go to the funeral. And each of us was thinking as we went, it could have easily been me. That was 2 weeks ago, he said. They have already replaced him in the office. I hear his wife is moving out of the state to live with her parents. 2 weeks ago, he was working 50 feet away from me, and now it's just like he never existed at all. It's like a rock falling off into a pool of water, and then the water is the same as it was before it fell into the water, but the rock isn't there anymore. Rabbi, I've hardly slept at all since this happened. I just can't stop thinking it could have happened to me, and a few days later I would be forgotten as if I never lived. Shouldn't a man's life matter for more than that? Well, most people are kind of restricted by what they read or what they think or what they see. They see no further than under the sky or under the clouds, under the sun. Isn't there more to life than just getting up, going to work, coming home, reading the newspaper, going to bed, getting up, going to work, doing the whole thing over and over again, week after week, until you finally get too old and then you die? There's got to be more to life. Well, Solomon is saying, if you look at life without God in the picture, that's the way it looks. Actually, in verse 5, he says, the sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises again and goes down, day after day after day. He's really describing the sun rising in the east and then slowly moving over to the west. And then it goes to the dark side of the earth and comes back around to the east, rises in the east, and it goes down in the west and goes back around the dark side of the earth, day after day after day after day. Then while we're then in verse 6, he continues, the wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. Now, it's truly a remarkable statement in the Old Testament. This was way beyond its days, because long before any kind of modern discovery about the wind circuits and the global circulation of the atmosphere. They didn't know anything about that, but yet he describes it so perfectly. Solomon wrote this a long time before anybody ever knew about it. He used an illustration of how the world is mechanically going by. It does the same thing over and over and over again. A day starts, a day ends. A day starts, a day ends. We go through the same ritual day after day and continues the same thing through most of our life. And then he uses the cycle of water to illustrate the same thing. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. Flows in and comes out. It flows in, it comes out. In science, they teach you about this. He's telling us that just like the wind and it's just like the sun, And it's just like the generations of life. Things just continue to be the same over and over and over again. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. There have been times I felt that way. That there was a time in the hospital when we were there so many days, a couple of months inside the hospital, that it just kind of got to feeling that way. Everything was kind of the same thing. You had to question yourself and ask you, well, what's today? Or what was yesterday? Because everything continually moving the same. There's a futility to life if you try to observe it or live it without God. That's what Solomon's trying to say. I believe nearly everyone has come to this place in their life sometime. Even those of us who are Christians, we think this from time to time. When things get discouraging, it's so easy just to get caught up in thinking and feeling that we're just so insignificant in life and we don't really matter. Why are we here? Why does God leave us here? Until you remember God. Solomon then moves from the futility of life and he begins to talk about how the course of life is really frustrating. Another depressing subject. Verse 8. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. He's talking about life without God. There's no meaning, there's no purpose until you find God, till you look beyond just what you see here and you see God. Why do people sit on the edge of their chair and try to be entertained by watching television? There's nothing wrong with watching television necessarily. There is a need to focus on something to take our minds off of the futility of life. A person who doesn't have God in his life, he has to find meaning in something. He's searching. Verse 9. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Life over and over and over again. Very few. Vanity upon vanity, he said. He's talking about life without God. He speaks about the restlessness we have in trying to find something in our heart that gives us purpose, that gives us meaning, gives us reason for being here. But when you think about it, the basis for the entire entertainment industry is to take our mind off of life and other things of life. Verse 10, he continues, is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new. It has been already in the ages before us. There is no new remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. That's another discouraging statement, man. But life without God, nothing is fulfilling. This speaks of the restlessness of people in the world today, and I think that just fits exactly what's going on in the world today, this restlessness. Looking for something. Solomon says there's no real sense of satisfaction in whatever you do without God. You buy a new computer and it's fine and you love it until you get online and you see a new one that's come out that'll do a lot more, and suddenly that's what you need. You need all those extra things in yours. Yours is just not good enough anymore. We go from one thing to another. Thomas Edison once said, we're only bringing out the secrets of nature and applying them for the happiness of mankind. Now, you stop and think about it, and somebody say, well, he says here there's nothing new around it. Man, there's something new coming out all the time. I mean, every day there's some kind of new discovery and some kind of new labor-saving device, time-saving device that comes on the market. But there really is nothing new. In the beginning, God made everything that was necessary to sustain life. Now, there are discoveries of how to put those things that God has given us together to make different things to meet different needs through different times. But in the beginning, God made everything, the basis of everything that is made. He created and He put into the world. That's what Solomon is saying. There's nothing new. God made us. He put it here, and there's nothing new in the world coming into the world. The futility of life. And then he says, third, that there's nothing new about life. When Solomon started out, he was a man who walked with God. He prayed for God's wisdom. God gave him the wisdom to become the wisest man ever recorded. God gave him a hearing and an understanding heart that made him a very good king. Solomon walked with God, and he knew the meaning of life that God gave him. But the Bible tells us as he grew older and older, he became more prosperous. He became a lot more wealthy. Through his wealth, he lost part of the wisdom that God had given him. He began to not walk with God like he walked at the first. God told him to be very careful, and he had given a command to the Hebrews not to marry someone from outside their race. Why? He was not trying to contain them inside the race, but he was trying to warn them that if they took wives from outside the race, they would bring their pagan practices into as a way of compromise in the nation of Israel. Well, Solomon married a lot of pagan women, and they brought their pagan ways into Israel. As a matter of fact, to appease his wife, and you guys know how necessary that is, but to appease his wives, he had to build temples to their pagan gods so they could worship their pagan gods. And soon other people in Israel were worshiping these pagan gods too in these temples. God told him not to become real vain about material stuff. It tells us about, history tells us about his stables and how lavish they were and how big they were. And he had more horses than anyone. He just couldn't get enough of them, and he built more stables and made them more lavish than before. He got so indulged in himself and what he had done that he forgot to walk with God. Now he's looking back on his life, and he's saying, vanity of vanity. Man, he's had it all. Richest man in the world, he could have anything he wanted to. He was king. He had the power and the ability. He had led the nation to the heights of greatness, a great nation on the face of the earth. And he says there's no meaning or purpose in these things. No meaning under the sun. No meaning without God. Somebody said that Solomon is just like a European fable about a spider. It seems that this spider descended one day on a single thread from a barn's lofty rafters, and it lighted near the corner of a window, and it built its web. Well, the corner of the barn was a very busy place, and soon the spider waxed fat and prosperous. One day he was looking at his web, and he noticed the strand that reached up to the loft above. Well, he had forgotten its significance, and thinking that it was a stray thread, he snapped it, and his whole world fell apart. Solomon had lost the connection with heaven in his mind and in his heart. But God had not forsaken Solomon. Solomon was looking for significance and purpose because he forgot about the significance and purpose and how it's only found in God. It doesn't matter what we achieve here in life, how many titles that we carry. It doesn't matter how many books that we write. It doesn't matter how much money we have in the bank. It doesn't matter what positions we hold or how many people look up to us. It doesn't matter what we've been able to achieve or what we've been able to do. Purpose and meaning is only found in God, period. Everything under the sun is meaning. It's vain. It's vanity. I need to tell you that there's only one who can tell you what the meaning of life is. I'm not sure I'm the one that totally knows the meaning of life, but in chapter 3, verse 11, he kind of sums all this stuff up. He says he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the meaning and purpose of life. Only comes from the richest man on the face of the earth today is a person who has recognized God is our all in all, and serving Him is the only thing. Would you stand? Brother Jerry's going to come and lead us in the verse of I surrender all. If God's speaking in your heart, we invite you to come. The altar is open here. We invite you to come to the altar if God is leading you as we sing together.